Zombies are impossible. They just can't happen. And you really only need to take a look at 2 tissues in the human body to see why that's the case. And in today's video, we're gonna use the cadavers to do just that and see why it's such a big deal when those tissues become compromised. And hopefully, at the end of this, if all goes well, we'll be able to put the final nail in the coffin for these zombies and they can stay in the ground where they belong. Let's do this. While I'm about to demolish the very possibility of zombies, I do need to mention there's actually one type of zombie that does exist and is actually quite rampant, the internet zombie. This is someone who uses the internet without a VPN such as Surfshark. I know, it's madness. A VPN, for those who don't know, is a virtual private network that allows you to stay safe online whether you're browsing in public or at home. And it does this by encrypting the data coming to and from your device, which makes life pretty difficult for shady people like hackers. Or let's say you wanted to binge watch The Walking Dead after this video in order to point out how impossible it all is, only to find out it's not available in your region. Well, all you need to do is use Surfshark to switch your geographical location to somewhere it is available, refresh your browser, and boom, you're ready to frustrate anyone watching The Walking Dead with you. Use our code to get 83% off plus an additional 3 months for free, and Surfshark will even give you a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you really have nothing to lose by giving this a shot. Link is in the description below. Let's start by going over what happens to your body in the minutes to hours to days after your death. Your body will go through what are known as the stages of death. And the first stage is what's known as pallor mortis, and this is where your skin will become pale. That's because when you die, the blood from your superficial tissues like your skin will drain away from the surface, causing you to look more pale. This even happens to darker skin tones, it's just gonna be less noticeable. And this will happen somewhere around 10 to 15-ish minutes post-mortem. Then you also have another stage called algor mortis. Now this one is highly variable dependent upon the environment you die in. That's because algor mortis is where your body starts to match the temperature of the surrounding environment. But I mean, think about how many different things that can affect this, right? Is it a hot or cold environment? Is it a dry or humid environment, right? If it's a colder environment, then the body is going to decompose at a slower rate. If it's a more humid and moist, I know people don't like that word, environment, then your body's gonna decay more quickly. So there's a lot of variables that are gonna go into it, but you have to just if we could just blanketly understand it this way, environment matters. The environment with which you are a zombie and navigating through, that matters dramatically for what's gonna be happening to your body, or at least the rate with which it's gonna be happening. Another stage of death is called livor mortis. Now this is where your blood will actually pool due to gravity. So let's say if I were to pass away on my back, then what would happen is gravity would pull the blood towards my back and you would then see blood on that back. Now, imagine if I passed away on my stomach, you'd see the same exact thing there. If I passed away standing up, you'd see the blood pooling into the limbs. So livor mortis is going to be that pooling of blood. But the stage of death that's going to be most relevant to us is going to be what's known as rigor mortis. If you've ever seen roadkill on the side of the road, you understand what rigor mortis is. It's a stiffening of muscles. Now this is going to start to occur pretty much immediately after death, but it's going to start peaking around 2 to 12 hours after death. Or at least I should say it's noticeable around 2-ish hours, and then 12 or so hours after death is when it really starts to peak. And then it will end about a day and a half at post-mortem, so around 36-ish hours. But in order to understand why the muscles are going to stiffen, we need to understand how muscles contract in the first place. So let's go ahead and take a look at the cadaver here. And you're gonna notice that I have 2 different muscles right here. This is called the pectoralis major muscle, and then this one is the deltoid muscle. And you're gonna notice that the deltoid kind of looks a little neater. You can see all the connective tissue is still very much intact on the deltoid, while on pectoralis major here, you can see it's more tattered, and that's because all the immense amounts of connective tissue that surrounds each muscle cell and the groups of muscle cells has kind of been, well, broken apart. But that's gonna be the only real big difference between those 2 muscles. But In order for a muscle to contract, I want you to just think about this. If calcium is present inside of the muscle cell, this muscle cell will contract and get shorter. Calcium is the driver for it all. Now, in order for calcium to be released, normally you would have to, well, initiate that contraction, right? You decide to contract your muscles. But after you die, the storage facility, I know you can't see this inside of these muscles here because this is all going to be microscopic inside of that muscle tissue, but the storage facility for calcium begins to break down. And when it breaks down, the calcium will flood inside of the muscle cell, and in the presence of calcium, the proteins. Now, I think this is something we all very intuitively understand because you hear about it everywhere, that proteins are what make muscles contract. In the presence of calcium, those proteins will attach to each other and contract. But here's the thing. As long as that calcium stays there, the contraction stays as well. You could think of it as a cramp. Now, the question is, how do you get rid of the calcium? In order to get the calcium out of this area, and normally this is, and back in its storage facility, you would need chemical energy in the form of ATP. That stands for adenosine triphosphate. This is the chemical energy for your body. Everything in your body, all the cells, all the machinery that the cells are using, that all requires energy to do that, and it comes in the form of ATP. How do you think you make ATP? You make ATP with, oxygen, and then things like carbohydrates, glucose, lactose, and then lipids. So here's the thing. I don't know if this is going to surprise you or not, but when you die, you're not able to get oxygen to your cells, right? Your breathing is completely done for. Your heart is not beating, therefore you're not going to be able to deliver it to the cells. And you can still make ATP without oxygen, but you can't make near the amount that you need to in order to sustain the trillions of chemical reactions that are happening all over your body. What this means is that the calcium can't leave, so it's permanently stuck that way. And that's where you get this extremely rigid, stiff corpse. We call that rigor mortis. But eventually, rigor mortis is going to have to end. I said earlier, it happens around 36 or so hours, depending on the environment. So the question is, how does rigor mortis end? Well, it ends due to a very fascinating process known as autolysis. Autolysis is when the cells begin to digest themselves. So if you go back to what we just said, your body can still make ATP without oxygen. But without oxygen, one of the byproducts is going to be acids. And when these acids start to accumulate in the cell, it starts to break down a very specific thing called a lysosome. Also peroxisomes too, but there are these tiny little organelles inside of your cells called peroxisomes and lysosomes. And inside of them are digestive enzymes. Well, in the presence of acids, they start to break down and their enzymes leak out into the cell. So picture this, right? Inside of all these muscle cells, and you can see these muscle cells just going lengthwise like this, there are going to be innumerable amounts of lysosomes and some peroxisomes. And what will happen is they break down and then the cells will start to digest themselves. So all those proteins that are stuck together, what's going to happen is the digestive enzymes are going to break them apart, and that separates the connection. And so then you're going to get this secondary relaxation. And I should say that when you first die, you do have a primary relaxation, so the body will go limp. But then as rigor mortis sets in, it gets stiff, then autolysis takes over and breaks it down. You get this secondary relaxation after that. So to bring this to zombies, how are they moving, right? Because even if you wait until rigor mortis ends, there's nothing to actually contract. There's no way to move. Look at this, right? So in front of you, I have an arm. Now, I've covered the fingers because that tends to make people a little uncomfortable. But what you're going to notice looking at all these muscles is, besides the lack of skin, if I start to move the wrist, so I'm attempting to move the wrist here, it's stiff. Now, the embalming process does something very similar to rigor mortis, but it is definitely going to be different. And I myself am not an embalmer, so I'm not going to pretend to know the exact chemistry behind this, but how it's been described to me by embalmers is that the chemicals used to preserve the bodies actually causes the proteins to fuse. So what you end up with is a very stiff, again, I'm moving the wrist here, and that's as much movement as we're going to get. If I were to get more movement, I would have to start actually ripping the muscle tissue. That's the only way you can do it. But now again, think like a zombie. So let's say the zombies are crazy stiff and they're somehow able to do some movement. Well, if they start to get and increase their range of motion, they're literally ripping the proteins that are stuck together, and proteins are how you actually generate movement. And then if they wait until autolysis happens, they're not even gonna be able to move at all because there's no proteins to attach to anything to generate the movement. The point here is zombies can't move. They're not gonna be able to chase you. It doesn't matter if they're a running zombie, if they're a walking zombie, they're a flying zombie. If they're dead, they're not gonna be able to come after you. And that's just due to the fact that the body starts to break down and decompose. And I haven't even talked about what will happen with the environment in terms of like microbes, fungus, bacteria. Those aren't just sitting there hanging out. They're gonna also start digesting you. So not only are your cells gonna digest themselves, but the bacteria and fungus and all the microbes around you are also gonna start to consume the body. So zombies are not gonna be able to move anywhere. But that's only one part of the story. We have to really ask ourselves, well, where does movement even generate? Because you might be thinking, Justin, okay, well, what if they die? Can they be a zombie in the first couple hours? You said rigor mortis doesn't set in until about 2 hours, or at least become highly noticeable. Well, no, that's not possible either, and I can show you why. And we now have to look at brains. This right here is the right hemisphere of a real human brain, or according to zombie lore, the most desirable aspect of humans to consume. I still haven't figured that one out. Actually, quick side note, I haven't figured out why they need to eat at all and what good that would even do them. I mean, how does their digestive system work? How do they get the nutrients into their body? It's besides the point. That's yet another reason why they won't work. But going back to the brain here, I want to focus on a very specific area right here, kind of tracing, and it's kind of difficult to see because there's no like lines saying you're now entering this area of the brain. This is what's known as the primary motor cortex. And this is going to be important because that is where the nervous impulses begin for movement. So let's say I wanted to wiggle my fingers. Well, that is going to start in the primary motor cortex. But before it can get all the way down to my fingers, it's going to first go to, oh, by the way, if you see anything dropping from the brain here, that is what's known as phenoxyethanol. That's the wetting agent we use in order to maintain the cadavers. It's not like it's brain juice or anything like that. Weird. But I want to actually flip the brain over to show you one of my absolute favorite structures. And it's this one right here. This is called the cerebellum. Now, the cerebellum is responsible for coordinating your muscles, so your muscle activity. So again, if I want to wiggle my fingers, right, and do this, the cerebellum is what's going to make it nice and smooth. And so what happens is the signal from the primary motor cortex travels to the cerebellum, and the cerebellum will smooth it out, right? Without this, it would be all disjointed and sloppy. In fact, a real easy way to think about how the cerebellum and primary motor cortex interact is think about a newborn. If you've ever seen a newborn, they can move their limbs, they can move all over the place, they just have absolutely no coordination with it. They might even punch themselves in the face or something like that. And that's because it takes years for a lot of activities to refine the coordination, the communication between that motor cortex and the cerebellum. But once you get that, then you start getting those smooth coordinated activities. So after it comes from the cerebellum, it's then gonna go through the brainstem, and then it's gonna start traveling all the way down to the muscles. And once it gets to the muscles, the neurons are going to attach, well, not directly and physically attach, but get pretty close to attaching to the muscle cells, and they're going to send another impulse. They're going to send a neurotransmitter onto the surface of the muscle cell. But the thing you have to understand is, how is the signal even getting to them? So if we go back right? You have no oxygen, which means your brain is not really going to be able to do much. Your brain, I like to describe as being a princess. And I don't mean that in an offensive way towards princesses or anything. I mean that from that Princess and the Pea bedtime story. If any of you are familiar, there's this story where there's this princess who can feel a pea under her mattress no matter how many mattresses get stacked on top of it. Your brain is extraordinarily sensitive to changes in its environment. So much so that small changes can have drastic consequences and symptomology based off of that. My point here is, without oxygen, your brain cells, the neurons inside of there, all of these, there's 86 billion neurons inside of this thing, they're all gonna start dying in about 3-ish minutes. But that's death. They start to just kind of shut down within seconds. If any of you've ever seen, say like with MMA, some kind of blood choke or something along those lines where they compress the carotid artery, you can see that people will pass out very quickly from a lack of blood to the brain. So again, the brain is a princess tissue. It needs that oxygen. But without the oxygen, it's not going to be able to make the ATP. And remember, ATP is the linchpin. It's what makes everything work. So in order to send the signal all the way down to the muscle cells, you're going to need ATP at various points during that process. Without it, you're not going to be able to send any kind of nervous impulse. At the same time, the cells are just outright dying and they're going to start breaking down due to autolysis, just like we saw in the muscles. So that's how are you even sending the contraction? So you're sitting there saying, Justin, all right, can you be a zombie in the first few minutes to hours? No, because the brain shuts down within seconds and is dead within minutes, and then is not capable of actually sending a signal to the muscles, and so the muscles are getting rigor mortis. The whole thing just starts breaking down. You have to understand, the brain also has an obscene amount of water in it. And the more water, the more susceptible it's also going to be to autolysis and the decomposition process. That's all neurological tissue. I mean, come on, I haven't even talked about the eyes. The eyes, how are zombies going to see you? The eyes are going to start to decompose. So are they smelling you? Well, the olfactory nerve is also going to decompose. And plus, the olfactory nerve is connected to the brain, and the brain isn't able to process any of this. Okay, so are they hearing you? Well, what about the muscles inside of your middle ear or the inner ear? That's that whole membrane in there. All that's going to start to deteriorate. And again, the nerves are not going to be able to transmit sound. So the zombies can't hear you. They can't smell you. They can't see you. Are they tasting the air like a snake? Right? In order to grab the chemicals, in order to bring that in so they can taste? That wouldn't work either. There is no way zombies can possibly work. Now, I can already hear so many people out there. They're probably already in the comment section, and they didn't wait to this point in the video to be like, well, what about parasites or fungus or something else? What I'm talking about here is your typical zombie. It doesn't matter if they're running, flying, swimming, sprinting, jumping zombie. The classical zombie is dead. And if you're dead, that means you're not making ATP. You're not sustaining the chemical reactions that are needed throughout your body in order to move, to breathe, to do all that type of stuff. And I would argue that if a fungus or a parasite or something is taking over you like a virus and you're not dead, I would argue that you're not actually a zombie. There's something else happening, but again, that's like semantics. And I don't know that we really need to approach that with this video, but my point here is zombies are not possible if we're talking about a zombie being a dead human that comes back to life, right? The living dead, the walking dead. That makes absolutely no sense. Thanks again to Surfshark VPN for sponsoring this video. Remember, use our code to get 83% off and an additional 3 months for free with a 30-day money-back guarantee. This is a no-brainer, pun intended. Link in the description below. But hopefully you enjoyed this video and you now know why it's completely impossible for zombies to exist. Now, that doesn't mean you can't enjoy a good zombie movie or TV show. I still do. I just make sure to completely annoy everyone who's watching it with me by pointing out like that's not possible. That wouldn't work. It's really exciting for everyone. I think you'll enjoy it. But as always, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.